Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It is a wonderful opportunity I have today to welcome an old friend, Rabbi Yaakov Trump, who is the rabbi of the Young Israel of Lawrence Cedarhurst, a very, very prominent young Rav in our Jewish community, originally from Johannesburg, South Africa. Rabbi Trump is a person who not only has continued to build his shul into a vibrant Makom Torah, but also is a person who teaches an extraordinary amount of Torah. He gives online a Anach Yomi, an Aliyah Yomi, Psuke Hadaf. You find his name on all sorts of podcasts and other opportunities to learn online. And he also teaches at Shulamit High School for Girls, halacha courses there. So Rabbi Trump, thank you so very much for joining me today.
It is a pleasure to join you again, Roman. Thank you. I have to tell you, it's wonderful to be back in Chicago without having to feel the weather.
Well, our weather today, we're in the 40s or the 50s. It's Baruch Hashem, it's beautiful out. So, Rabbi Trump, I just want to really get started with a very simple question for you. You have really done amazing things. You were in Chicago as a member of the YU Torah Mitzion Kollel for a couple of years, so many people from Chicago know you quite well. But since you've been at the Young Israel, things have really blossomed. Now, you've studied in Israel, you were in Baltimore near Israel, you were at YU, you're from South Africa, and now you're in Lawrence Cedarhurst. How do you see the changing scene of synagogue life? How are you doing what you're doing, and how do you see things are moving nowadays?
Thank you, Roman. Thank you. It's an opportunity. I thank you for the question. But the truth is that biladai, there's so much more that goes on in successful shuls than one person. So I certainly am not responsible for all the success, and there's many other people, predecessors, and people who are on the team who are incredible in making that happen. But I will say that it's been a process for me to try to understand things. And it also just takes me back to Chicago days in a special way, and the people that I learned from and continue to learn from, including yourself, as we live just a few blocks away from KINS, and seeing you in action as a shul rabbi was an incredibly important part of that. And I'll just also say, just this week in Chicago, it's a time which causes me to pause and think, and that is we were also members at Shari Tzedek with Rabbi Gross, of blessed memory, and we're still just reeling in that terrible loss of the Chicago community in the world. And the truth is that every person goes through, every young family goes through their, I would call, maturing process in community. A lot of young people don't know what community really means yet. And they slowly start realizing that they actually have to be involved. And we started getting involved and being involved. The first shul membership I paid as a young couple was to Shari Tzedek when we sort of were getting involved in Chicago, and to see what a community is, what it means to be part, to pull one's weight, to be involved. And Gross was certainly a huge part of that in his very calm and balanced equilibrium and the way that he treated everybody, and the role modeling that he did, always addressing the issues of the day in with such a calm and balanced perspective on things. So just coming back to one specific marker in time, that to me is especially meaningful, especially this week where I reflect on that. That's one aspect of it. But there's a broad array, and that is that it goes down to, when I think back to my childhood, the Rabbi Marshall is a person by the name of Rabbi Moshe Kurtztag. He was the based in South Africa, and 6'4", towering individuals. The Rabbi B'nai Akiva at the time, that was the shulman in terms of the Observatory Minyan, and he had a long black frock and a long white beard, and very terrifying to behold. But I remember when I became bar mitzvah, and the Shabbos after I became bar mitzvah, he said, "No, Yaakov Tzvi, why don't you daven?" And that was it. So it started from a young age where people said, you got to get involved, you got to do things, you got to carry on getting involved. And over time, I've had the opportunity of witnessing incredible people who've been involved and trying to model little pieces of what I'm trying to do after those many people who do those things.
But it's very hard nowadays. If you look at Jewish organizations in particular, people are so busy with their lives. People are working harder than ever before because of the costs of being part of a Jewish community, that to get volunteers to really be involved is unusual. More shuls and schools have professionals who do things that a generation or two ago, volunteers did. Everything from running programming to a lot of the functions of even fundraising. It used to be Balabatim did everything. Are you suggesting that to build a successful shul, it's really around the volunteerism, or is there something else that people are looking for?
That's such a good question. I don't think there's one magic bullet that fits all, but there are a few pieces that I'm slowly, in my short span of experience, I'm becoming to see. I used to think that it was the rabbi who made the shul, and the truth is the rabbi does set a lot of tones and does make a big difference in the shul. But ultimately, a shul is a volunteer-run organization. So there's a very small staff, a very small amount of people who are actually being paid, trying to make a huge difference in the impact in the lives of the people. But the truth is that a lot of it really works when everybody's involved, when people pull up their sleeves and get involved. And so the shift in perspective was that a shul isn't so much a place where you come to watch a show, but more of a place where you come to get involved. And like you're pointing out, as the statistics have been showing, that volunteer involvement across America has been dropping precipitously already. Robert Putnam was talking about this in 2000, and in the last few years, and the last couple of decades since that book, I mean, even more so. So the question is so how does it work? How do you get people involved? Because people don't just step up. People aren't volunteering by themselves. And I think that a lot of it comes down to, first of all, belonging. People need to feel a place to belong. Once they feel like they have a place to belong, they feel ownership. But number two is that a lot of times people just are unaware of what goes into any communal organization. They just don't understand the nuts and bolts, the requirements, how much effort, time, energy, decision-making, balancing it goes into things. And the more that people are brought behind the scenes, the more of an appreciation, the more they're willing to either get chased away, but more generally speaking, actually get involved as well. And so I've sort of shifted looking at a shul from a, so to speak, a model of a non-profit or a spiritual organization as much to a volunteer-based, non-for-profit, which is trying to figure out how to get as many people involved as possible. And the more people are involved, the more ideas they bring to the table, the more perspectives they bring, the more experiences they're willing to share. And those are the most incredible things. I'll give you an example. Just recently, we did, I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off here.
No, you're doing well.
Just recently, we had a very fascinating opportunity. We did a mental health awareness Shabbos, and very, very sensitive, very difficult topic to address, but something which so many families are struggling with. And I'll tell you, the two most successful, most beautiful, most appreciated programs in the last year were based on this model, where we had 5 panelists, and instead of doing a Shabbos morning drasha, we had those people who came up on the stage after davening had finished, and each of them shared a perspective of either their struggle, a family member's struggle, or a clinician's perspective on the Shabbos mental health. It went over, it was certainly went a little longer than expected, but there was a Kiddush afterwards for debriefing, and it was the most meaningful Shabbos. We did another one on Shavuos called Stories of Transformation, people who had a journey to get towards Judaism. I mean, we had 5 of them on the stage as well, and each of them shared their story. It was so meaningful. Over 300 people attended. Why? Because it wasn't one person. They're not the bottleneck of information or ideas. It's being able to share, democratize that experience, and it makes connections in a much more meaningful way. And that's part of the goal, is to be able to allow more people to shine in their own ways.
So you went to Ner Yisrael, you went to Kerem B'Yavne, you went to Reitz Yeshiva University, you were a member of a kollel here in Chicago. What prepared you to be able to have this perspective, to be able to lead a shul like this? Once upon a time, the Rav was supposed to be the halachic expert, and people went to him to hear shiurim. It wasn't the democratic organization you're suggesting. Today, it sounds so very different, and yet our preparation is pretty much the same.
Right, you're correct, and the truth is there is no preparation. I mean, the most outstanding place for training rabbanim is Reitz, which really does it's an incredible job under the auspices of Rabbi Penna, and it really, both in terms of halacha, machshava, learning, and at the same time also pastoral care. But at the same time, all of that's theory. You spend 4 years learning that, and you go out into the world, and everything you learned is different. It's much more complex, much more difficult, and there is no preparation. And the only way that, I mean, again, I'm still learning. I'm no expert in the field at all, but I'm trying in the little way that I can to figure things out, is through the combination of experience, actually facing these issues, and at the same time speaking and learning from the people who have preceded one. And so the way I look at it, it's just the sort of model I map it out as, is I see that the rabbinate is essentially 4 buckets. And the one bucket is education, which is so the sheer giver, the Joshua giver, the putting together programs of education. That's one, and I think perhaps the most obvious of the buckets. But there's another bucket, which is the pastoral giver, and that's the sickbed, the life cycle, with the birth, the upshare and the bar mitzvah, the bat mitzvah, the wedding, the all those, everything from the beginning to the end. There's the pastoral giver, and a lot of that goes unseen. Right, tremendous amount that goes unseen. Then there's this third bucket is the organizer. So the organizer is like programs. Like Rabbi, thank you, you're doing an incredible podcast. It takes a huge amount of work to put this up to get together, put out the advertising, organize who's speaking. These are small things that perhaps a person watching this podcast doesn't realize. They just log in. They don't realize all the organization that went behind it. So what about the next program? What's the next brochure going to look like? Well, how are we going to try to engage people where they're at? That's all the organizational piece, which is not education per se. It's more bigger picture. And then there's I would call the most unseen, which is called the ambassadorship, which is where the rabbi has to sort of represent the shul, whether it's at the Vada Kashrus or whether with local politicians or go to the school events or the press conferences and so on to represent the community and to sort of give a voice to the community in that respect. And these four things are moving at the same time. The day is sometimes a great overlapping of all those different pulling requirements on a person. And so it's trying to learn how to balance the two of them and to also bring, as I was saying before, bring people in to understand what's really going on. And so I look at Rabbonim, the predecessor, Rabbi Tadelbaum, who's the Rav of Young Israel in Cedarhurst for 32 years, was an excellent Rav, and he was a tremendous role model and leader. He was a tremendous caregiver, a Baal Hara, a Poisek, as an example, when I had the opportunity of learning here. And there's been many Rabbanim I look to people. I served with Rabbi Hochberg as a rabbinic intern when I was in Queens. When I was in Chicago, I learned specifically when I was in Chicago. I learned from Rabbi Matanki. I used to watch you all the time and appreciate what you and I personally think, and that Rabbi Matanki must have a clone, because I don't know how it's possible for him to run a school and a shul and the community at the same time. But I certainly, I personally was awestruck by the amount that you do with such calmness. And as I mentioned beforehand, Rabbi Gross, but every person along the way to me is a role model that somehow I'm learning something about dealing with the situations, and I apply to my own way.
And if you were looking forward, which I'm sure you always are, but if looking forward 5-10 years, what do you think are going to be the major issues shuls are going to have to deal with?
Well, I think the shul is really a microcosm of what's happening in the community, which is a microcosm of what's happening actually, ironically, in America, which is apathy. So the major thing that we're dealing with over here is that we're ensconced in a culture around us which has lost its general sense of values which guide it. So that means to say that the general principles that people choose or follow when it comes to making a choice in life, the two primary operating we'll call it I wouldn't even call them values, but models are entertainment and convenience. That's what pushes people to make decisions, right? So in like an obvious example, we all appreciate staples, but we're still going to buy from Amazon because it's more convenient. And that affects every aspect of our lives. So I know it's important to have big shuls, but it's much easier just to go, to the basement across the road where I can get whiskey after 1 hour and 15 minutes, not have to hear a rabbi, and then, come 20 minutes late, leave 20 minutes early, and the changes in the middle. So there's no value that's operating over there. It's convenient. So that's going to affect Jewish community, already is affecting Jewish community. And I think we're going to have to take stock regarding that, because I think what the crisis is happening is already happening is that it affects children who are grown up in apathy, without values, without being driven to do something, without passion to change something, are going to also grow up where not finding what it is that's important, and all other kinds of narratives will co-opt them in the absence of having a passionate direction in life.
So I find this last point of yours fascinating, because we've been watching here in Chicago, and it's around the world, the stabilization of shuls, where we could have 12 shuls on one street within half a mile, that because everybody wants their own little brand, their own little flavor, and where large shuls are having a very difficult time going of it. Is that the same thing you're watching in the 5 towns in New York as well?
For sure, it's happening everywhere. The idea that this idea of, and I know KINS, is this beautiful, beautiful shul, cavernous, magnificent stained glass windows, rows upon rows of pews, beautiful stage. That model of filling that kind of place up on a Shabbos, we have the same thing. We see our main shul seats 600 on a Shabbos. No shul, no shtibel is getting 600 people. So what people will say is that, oh, but shtibel XYZ is doing so well. Yeah, well, they got 30 seats. So, if there's 33 people, it's an overflow crowd. Whereas, we could be getting 120 people on Shabbos and it looks empty. Right, so that's one piece of the puzzle. But part of it is that there is a value in Judaism. Judaism is a value-driven system. So Judaism has halacha, and halacha says b'rava ma'ajas melech. There's a value of lots of people being together. That value is losing the battle against convenience, and convenience is faster, quicker, nearer. But it's also something deeper. And there's a positive side to it, which is people want to be involved. They want to feel like they matter, and so sometimes people will join these operations because they matter more. Right, there's 30 people who are involved, and somebody's putting out the kiddush, and somebody's setting up the chairs, and somebody's getting the whiskey. They feel like they're part of something, and so part of the way to address this, there's many ways to address this, is to create microcosms within larger establishments. You can't have this large enterprise with a bottleneck top with a few people who are in charge. You need to have groups who feel like they're doing something, they really are doing smaller projects, which they feel that they actually own as well, because that's where they feel the belonging. It won't help the convenience aspect of the breakaways, but it will as well in terms of the involvement. There's also another piece just over here, which is that I think that we also need to shift our perspective of what really matters in terms of being considered a shul. So it used to be in the year before hashkamas and shtibbles, everybody was in the main shul, everybody can. That's not what's happening. And fighting that, I think, is trying to catch a runaway train. I think that we need also embrace the perspective that it's possible for people to be involved in shuls in multiple different ways. So as an example, there are many people who don't come to shul on Shabbos. They prefer the shtibel around the corner. But enjoy learning with Ibn Chabur on Tuesday nights. And that's their connection to shul. And, that's a special way to be able to learn. And I value that chevra, even though the shul's not the flavor or the space for them on Shabbos. So it's creating multiple portals and being more embracing of different avenues of access to shul is another perspective.
Right. Now, you also work in a high school, but you also obviously in the shul have children of all ages. And one of the fascinating shifts that has occurred in our communities with the building of Eruvim, which goes back 40, 50 years in many communities. In Chicago, we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the West Rogers Park Eruv, that we have created these children's groups, the Shabbat morning children's groups, and youth minyanim were around before, but we have a situation where we don't have children davening in our shuls anymore. They are in separate places, and a child can go almost to bar mitzvah and never have to attend a regular minyan, but they're into some kind of alternative scenarios. I find that to be a bit of a challenge because we've never taught them how to be in shul, which they will do hopefully as adults, or maybe they'll reject it as adults and go to the shtibel. Do you have those same kind of challenges in your shul?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I would go into shul with my parents. My father passed away when I was very young, so I found other people to sit next to, but I was in the main shul. And that was my shul experience. I grew up in shul. By 8, I was going to shul to say Kaddish. So I had that experience. I was very involved in shul, and I think that there is something to be said, an incredible amount about learning from the way parents are or with one's parents. I think that today there's a little bit of a challenge. In the sense that some people view shul, and it's a great thing. It's an opportunity as a way to outsource, so to speak, or babysit while we have a good time in shul, which is great. But it's not the way that kids are going to necessarily gain the greatest experience. The model that I think is really worthwhile considering, and this is a parent by parent basis, is that you should take your kids to shul when they really want to come to shul, rather than when you want to get to shul. Meaning, say maybe leaving them at home a little bit longer and seeing, and when they desperately want to come to shul, that's when they deserve to. And that could mean leaving them in groups until they get to that age, but making it something that is sought after, so increasing the demand in it as well. I will just say that although this is a challenge, if you reflect outwards to the opposite, where there's a shtibel, it's not like that. That's the panacea either. Because you go to the shtibel situation, there's no groups. Not only there are no groups, there's no space for groups, which means that children bichlal aren't in shul at all. They're not in any environment. Whereas I think that having groups in a big shul still step up from that, where the children are at least davening. They have a role model who's a teenager or perhaps a mora who's actually involved with them. And from time to time, we bring them up to the shul itself to bring them as part of it. So I still think that's a better option than the alternative, which is the absence of anything.
And in terms of getting people involved in programming, is there a program that you really want to do that you haven't been able to do yet? And what's your dream program that you'd love to do?
So many dream programs. The list is so long that it's hard to even know where to start. I find that I when I wash the dishes, that's when all the ideas come out. I have to make sure after I have those moments to actually think or go for a walk to write them down. There are so many programs. What I'm trying to do is just to hear what people are saying, meaning it's all very nice to have all these great ideas, but you have to be able to listen to where people are at. So as an example, a few years ago, we had some seniors saying there's nothing for us. So we created prime time for seniors. We have an amazing program on Mondays for seniors. Fantastic. Then there's
what is that program before you go on? What is the program?
It's fantastic. We partner with the JCC, the local JCC. We have a social worker come who does chair exercises with retirees. So it's music and exercises. And then we have a lunch program following, and we have a rotation of speakers. So we just finished a season where we had a pulmonologist talk about coughing, and we had a state attorney talking about wills and planning, and we had we're going to have a bingo day, in a few days. Just really nice activities, and that's why, because there's a crowd of people who say we want something. This is something we're looking for. Something I'll tell you, which I think is incredibly important coming up, is that there's a lot of people who have aging parents, and caring for an aging parent it presents its own unique set of skills and challenges, and it's a special opportunity. But there's a lot of people specifically in that demographic. I think that demographic requires some sort of we'll call it seminar or program on that, and I'd love to get more people involved in terms of actually talking about that stage. The piece that's also missing is, I just sort of see it as different pieces of the pie, is the teenage demographic. What I would love to do is I would love to get more girls involved in teen programming at the shul. That seems to be one of the things that there's a fall off, which I'm very concerned about, is that girls are involved and they come to groups and so on, and some of them become teen leaders, which is great, youth leaders, and they sort of come back and they give back to the shul. But a lot of them will reach bat mitzvah age, and if they don't have a connection to sit with their mom during davening, which some of them don't, they sort of disappear. That the teen minyan is predominantly boys, and you need to think about ways to get the girls involved in their own independent way in shul life as well. So that's another sort of an example of a vacant space. Demographics in terms of ownership and leadership.
Recently, I'm sure you came across, there was a op-ed piece by Ben Shapiro, which attacked the modern Orthodox community. There have been some responses that have been written to it as well, but basically he was declaring the demise of modern Orthodoxy.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for raising that. I actually, a number of people sent me that article as it was trending and going around. The first thing is obviously that it's when you want to make a point, it's obviously much easier to use a broad brush stroke. So it's nice to misunderstand the OU and the YU and sort of just within an unsubtle, uncontextualized way to slam them, which is what he did. And obviously context would have proven a lot more subtlety and a lot more perspective. So, but that's generally what happens is when you want to, use demagoguery, that's what happens. But there was a comment in that article which I did think was intriguing, and his observation was that his attack was on modern Orthodox rabbis. And he said that modern Orthodox rabbis don't talk about controversial issues. They only talk about issues which are nice for people to hear about, charity, giving, and so on, which he says are not unique to modern Orthodoxy. We'll call more Haredi, right-wing Judaism and Reform Judaism all agree on those values, and even Baha'i, he says, agrees on those values. So there's nothing, they're meaningless values, right? And that was his observation. That was his attack. So modern Orthodoxy kind of just shies away from anything which actually matters. That was his argument. So I thought about that for a while, and one perspective I think that's worthwhile considering, because there is truth to that. The one perspective is that it's not about the modern Orthodox rabbis, but it's more about the community. What does the community want to hear? If every time the community hears something which requires sacrifice, change, or pivoting, they get upset, then the question is what is the community really looking for? Is the community only looking to hear things that matter to it? I think that's a very fair point. But on the other hand, I was speaking to this issue 2 weeks ago from the pulpit, and a doctor in our community came up to me afterwards, and she said to me, you know what? It's, in the end of the day, speaking about charity and goodness to other people is not a foregone conclusion. It's not obvious to the rest of the world. If you go out there, there are many rich people who don't give a dime of charity. There are many people who don't care about other people. And emphasizing what it is and how that informs our day-to-day life is not something which can just be sneezed at and ignored as if it's the easy part of Judaism. So I think that it requires a lot more perspective. I do think that there is some soul searching that the modern Orthodox community in general should be doing that. I don't think Ben Shapiro is the one to be talking about it necessarily itself. And I would say that when it comes down to these things, that's why we have lay and rabbinic leaders, which means to say, as an example, in the YU situation, it was with consultation of both the board and the Rosh Yeshiva. Let's put that in perspective. Those are the folks who gave us the rules during COVID. The Rosh Yeshiva guided us through those things. I'm so proud to be part of this community that didn't just jeopardize all rules or jeopardize or embrace every conspiracy theory. I'm so proud that they actually decided to make a change in YU because there was a consultation with the Rosh Yeshiva, and so I'm very happy to and proud to stand behind that.
Many years ago, Sam Heilman, the sociologist, mentioned that any group that begins to experience a sense of triumphalism, like we've done it, we've won, it generally is the sign of the beginning of their demise. And so the fact that we continue to question and wonder and criticize is actually a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. And just something to consider at the same time. But as a proud member of the modern Orthodox community, you have a Young Israel, which was a pioneer in engaging younger people back in the early part of the 20th century. Do you find challenges within our community that really you work on very strongly, not just the question of charity and kindness?
Yeah, I think it comes back down to the very idea of apathy versus connection, and that's really what it is. It's less about branding today. That's why this whole business is sort of meaningless. You can call the YU community, the OU community, you can give all the brands you want. In the end of the day, what it comes down to is do people care enough to live a certain life or not? Do they belong enough? Do they feel connected enough? That's what the main challenge is here. And it's person by person, parent by parent, child by child, teen by teen, trying to figure out what is my space? What is my purpose? What is my mission? How am I going to make sacrifices to get there? What is this all about? How is this my identity, who I am as a Jew, not just simply as an ancillary cultural hobby from time to time? That's the major issue. It's not a foregone conclusion anymore that a person wakes up and is Jewish and will always be Jewish and their family will all be Jewish. Not in our communities, not in any community. And that's the main question, is being able to connect people with what really matters in life, what really is their identity, the chain that they're carrying from previous generations, that they should be able to continue to tell that to their grandchildren. That to me is the biggest challenge and the biggest, most I would say also rewarding of goals that we can incrementally move people towards and move ourselves towards as we're doing it.
And believe it or not, Rabbi Trump, our time is up. But on that note, I think I again have to thank you for all that you're doing for the Jewish community. The mere fact that when there's a pasuk on the Daf Yomi, you have a comment to explain it in the context to do so brings Torah to so many more people than would have been before, and all of the different ways you're trying to reach out to others. That question of trying to change the apathy to engagement and involvement is really an important message for us all. So thank you very much, Rabbi Trump, for your time. I appreciate it. It's good to see you. And you should come back and visit Chicago. It's warming up already. The winter's over.
I have to tell you, the best memories and experience have come from Chicago. And I'll just end with one little snippet, is that when I came to the Chicago Kollel, Rabbi Brand sat me down and said, tell me, what are you an expert in? And I said, well, I thought I was an expert in certain things. And he said, no, what are you actually doing? Like, do you know something? I said, no, not really. Actually, now that you put it that way, not really. And so I said, what do you want to become an expert in? So I said, well, I enjoyed teaching Nach. So he says, okay, I'm going to give you a Nach share in KINS. And so we started doing that. And I have to tell you, because of that comment, because of the opportunity of being in Chicago and learning through the Kollel, learning with you, being in the Ida Crown Jewish Academy, and continuing that what led to the Nach Yomi and the app and the Aliyah Yomi and all these things where are we going? And so I have such appreciation for the YU and Zion Kollel, the KINS community, the Chicago community at large, and I hope that Be'ezrat Hashem can continue to do the Jewish people proud as we all work together towards a greater goal.
Thank you so very much for your time, and continue to do great things in your community and for all of American Jewry. Thank you very much, Rabbi Trump.
Thank you.
Bye.